Good morning. It's good to be with you. I'm Larry Norman. I'm the Director of Volunteers in Mission, which is your mission arm of the United Methodist Church in Louisiana. And I'm so glad to be here with you this morning, not only because it's time of worship, but to me it is just a great honor to be asked by my friend Tim Smith to fill his pulpit. And I hope that I can do justice to our time here together. I know it was difficult to hear a while ago, but that was Tim on the phone. And just to kind of fill you in case it all didn't make sense, last Thursday we moved the team from La Tremblay, where they were working on the La Tremblay Church, into Port-au-Prince, or PAP as we call it, P-A-P. PAP is where the United Methodist Mission Guest House is. Now don't let that fool you, it's still kind of rustic, but it was a safer place for them to be. Not because of the storm. I felt that the team would be perfectly safe in the La Tremblay school where they were staying. But that is in a low-lying area, and I knew that there would be a lot of water, and it might be difficult for them to get in town to fly back if we left them there. The other concern I had, and this is one that you know well, living here in this community, after a storm, there are sometimes those people who are not exactly honest, and there's looting that takes place. I wanted to make sure that the team was safe. And so I moved them into the guest house, which is a building that is in a very populated area, high walls. It's in the mountains, which would protect them from mudslides and from flooding. But also would protect them from any looting if that was to take place. The team was very, very helpful while they were there. There was some restructuring or rebuilding that was going on at the guest house, and they participated in that. They also participated in helping UMCOR, United Methodist Committee on Relief, get ready for the coming storm. So they're now at the guest house. I did receive word from our travel agent this morning. She is working on getting them out of there either this afternoon or tomorrow, or at least by Tuesday. Now, we can't promise you anything because that's really in the hands of the airline. Right now, PAP is still closed, the airport, but they do plan to open today. What my travel agent told me just a few minutes ago, this is the first time I've ever brought my phone into worship, and I've been texting the whole time. But anyway, what she told me by text a while ago is that the airline has still not released any seats, and everything has been zeroed out for the next couple of days. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't. I suspect that we will need to fly them back through another entry port, such as Houston. We may need to fly them to Cancun first or somewhere like that, but then we'll fly them on in here. Their flight plan, as it stands, is for them to fly into Miami. Of course, Miami is where the storm is going to be, so we don't want to go that direction. We also need to time it just right so that they don't get to New Orleans at the same time the storm does. So, are there any of the families of the folks who are on the mission team here today? All right. Folks, we are watching out for you, and I know that the big threat right now is how do I get ready for a storm without my spouse here? So please know that we are in prayer for you, and if there's some way we can find to help, we will do that, because that's not an easy thing to do, to face that kind of thing alone. But God is with us and has been with us. You have seen that with the team, and I know that the same God will also bless and be with us if the storm does choose to come this way. Now, let's talk about mission. I hope that you got one of the newspapers when you came in this morning. I want to call your attention to it. I hope that you will spend some time reading the stories and looking through it during our worship service today. I'm that good. You can read while I'm preaching to you. But one of the things I want to call your special attention to right now is page 7. If you look on page 7, you'll see some green boxes there that describe for you a few of the mission teams that will be going out for the rest of the year. Now, it's kind of an older list. I can tell you that many more teams have been added, and we also have a list that's much larger that goes into 2013. But the list will serve to let you know the kinds of teams we have. We have international teams. We have statewide teams. We have teams that are here in the United States. Some of those teams are medical, some are educational, particularly Vacation Bible School, but you'll also find that some of the teams are construction. The majority of our teams, in fact, are construction. And we want to invite you this morning to consider being a part of one of those teams. Now, I'm going to make this a little heavy on you here. What I want you to understand by the time our time is over this morning is that God calls each and every person to do mission. No matter how young you are, no matter how old you are. A bishop that we had here in the Louisiana Conference several years ago named Bishop Solomon perhaps described it best. He said that mission is the doorway to discipleship. Now, we all know what discipleship is. We all claim to be disciples and followers of Jesus Christ. But to be a real disciple and to be a real follower, we have to do mission. Mission can be done locally, but a lot of people are called to do mission internationally, such as our team that is down there in Haiti right now. What Bishop Solomon would say is this, and I saw him actually interview a lady during the worship service one time. It was an older lady, and he had asked, how many have been a member of the church for 10 years? How many for 20? How many for 30? How many for 40? This lady had been a member of that congregation for over 50 years. And he said, well, have you been to church every Sunday? She said, well, most every Sunday. I would say maybe I've only missed 5%. And he said, that's wonderful. And said, tell me about Sunday school. And she said, oh, I've got my 25 or 30 or 50 year pin for Sunday school. I've been here and I taught Sunday school a lot of the times. He congratulated her on that. And then he asked her about Bible study, and he asked her about covered dish dinners. You know, that's a very holy time in the United Methodist Church, a covered dish dinner. And she'd been to every covered dish dinner. She couldn't recall any covered dish dinner that she'd ever missed. And she also told us about her recipe for smothered chicken that she always brought. But anyway, he finally got around and said, well, how many mission teams have you been on? And she said, well, I really have never been on a mission team. And he said, well, ma'am, you're what we call a peripheral Christian. Peripheral. As it is not quite made it, on the edge, prepared, but has not fulfilled her discipleship yet. Fulfillment of discipleship is when you go and you are in mission. And after all, Jesus said, if you want to know where I am, you'll find me among the poor and disenfranchised. Now, quite often we feel ourselves to be poor in some way. It may be financially, it may be spiritually, it may be that we don't have enough family. Each of us has some kind of poverty in our lives. And we know that Jesus is with us. But what we find when we go on mission is that we meet Christ in new ways. Because he's out there working with people who need his help in certain ways, unlike the help that we need from him. So when we go and meet Jesus in Haiti or in Cambodia or at the UMCOR depot in South Louisiana, we meet Jesus in new ways. And that is what we call filling out our discipleship. So I invite you to go and be a part of that. Now, there are many of you now who are thinking, well, I just don't know what I would do on a team. Well, let me tell you a little bit about that. If it's a construction team, we're looking for carpenters. We're looking for people who know how to do plumbing and electric and all that kind of stuff. But we also want those folks who are not really gifted and talented in those areas, because we can teach you what you need to know. We can show you what you need to do. Here's the test. Have you got one of those drawers in your kitchen? You know, the one, it's usually right next to the refrigerator. You pull the drawer out and there's a hammer in there. There's a screwdriver, a flathead screwdriver, and there's also a Phillips screwdriver. And there may be some other things in there, a wrench and a crescent wrench or something like that. But if you've got one of those drawers, how many have a drawer like that in your kitchen or maybe in the den, wherever it is, you qualify to be on one of our construction teams. Because if you got enough know-how to know that you need a hammer and you need a screwdriver in your house, you've got enough know-how to know how to be on a mission team. We'll show you what you need to know, and I'll give you some examples of that in my sermon in just a moment. Now, medical teams. That's the other big part of our ministry, or medical teams. We're looking for doctors and nurses. We're looking for dental technicians. How many have some kind of medical expertise in the congregation this morning? Have a lady back here. There were some in the earlier services. Well, we want you to come and be on one of our medical teams. I got a team going to India in February, and you just look like you perfectly fit into that team. But if you're not a medical person, we still want you to be on one of our medical teams. We will show you what you need to do. There's so many jobs that need to be done. But there is a test that you have to take to see if you're qualified to be on a medical team. And what I like to do, Reuben, is just give the test right here in the congregation, and you can make note of those that qualify to be on a medical team. Here's the way it goes. If you're with us this morning, raise your right hand. Okay, very good. This is the first part of the test. If you don't have a right hand, raise your left hand. Okay? Now, if you're not sure if you're actually with us this morning, look around you. If there are people with their hands up, then you are indeed with us. Okay? Now, okay, hands up. This longevity is a part of this. Oh, y'all think this is a joke, don't you? Now, this is an actual medical test. All right, here you go. Here's the hard part. With either your right hand or your left hand, can you curl your fingers in this manner? If you can do that, we can put a flashlight in there and you are a dental technician. See how simple it is? Even our musicians could do that. Among all the wonderful other things they do. That's one of the great parts about coming to this congregation. You get to hear these folks sing and play. Well, anyway, you are invited to consider. You are invited further to accept the fact that God is calling you to be on a mission team with Louisiana Volunteers in Mission. A great opportunity for that will be in April when this team goes back. Not during hurricane season. And you can go because you're going to hear wonderful stories about what happened and how they met God in new and different ways. This could be the fulfillment for you of your discipleship, what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. A number of years ago, I was serving a congregation in Baton Rouge, and the need came about for us to replace the lay leader of the congregation. And as we United Methodists are wont to do, we came together as the committee on nominations, and we began to talk about who it was we were going to ask to fulfill this important responsibility in the congregation for the rest of that year. There were a number of names that came to mind, but we were finally able to center it down to just two names, a man and a woman. We knew that the woman would be an excellent choice. She was an excellent speaker. She was a leader in the community. She had all kinds of expertise in speaking publicly and leading seminars and doing all kinds of things like that. But unfortunately, being a layperson, she had a real job. And the real job took up a great deal of her time. She was always traveling away to do those seminars. And we were afraid that because of that, and because she already held another important role in the church, that she would turn us down. It would simply be too much. We would be asking her to do more than she had time to give to the church. The other name, also an excellent choice, was a man. His name was Kent. He was a good worker in the church. He was a man's man who had been responsible for getting several, here's that word again, peripheral male members of the congregation more involved in its day-to-day life. The youth loved him. His faith life was exemplary. He was dynamic one-on-one. He wasn't too good as a general people person, but if you could just sit down and talk to him one-on-one, he was great. He had told me himself that he wasn't interested in any leadership role in the congregation, but that he was willing to help out on any committee at any time. He, we knew, would simply balk at the mention of standing in the pulpit and speaking to the congregation. He was a very shy person, not a public speaker. Well, we prayed and we talked and we talked and we prayed, and in so doing, we realized that it wasn't absolutely necessary that a lay leader speak from the pulpit. We consulted the discipline, and the discipline at no place says you can only have one lay leader. And so the plan began to form to have two lay leaders. We'd asked them both, and perhaps together they could share that load, that responsibility, and in doing so, our church would be led very well into the future for the rest of that year. We would ask them both, we would have co-lay leaders. If they could share the load, they might both agree. They would be a great pair, we thought. If we needed a speaker, an upfront people person, the woman would fill the bill. The man would be a leader of men, organizer for grunt work of the congregation, a rallying person for the youth. But I had to promise him that I would never, never, never ask him to stand in the pulpit and speak to the congregation. Well, the two accepted, as I said, and they did an excellent job. They were actually quite good working together, a great team. But then it happened, as always happens when any of us preachers make a promise to anybody in the congregation, we have to go back on our word. There were two committees that were getting ready for a special Sunday observance, and they came to me and they said, Norman, we don't want you in the pulpit that Sunday. We want to ask our two lay leaders to do the speaking. Well, I'm always more than willing to give the pulpit up to my lay leaders or anyone in the church who would like to say something about their faith. And so I said, okay, it's a great plan. I just need to tell you that the woman will say yes, she'll do an excellent job, but I'm going to encourage you not to ask Kent, the man, to do any of the speaking. And they said, why? And I said, because I promised him that he would never have to speak to the congregation. Well, they shook their head, as you lay people sometimes do, at us preachers, and they said, we're sorry you did that because we want you to be the one to go and ask them to do the speaking. So sure enough, I went to the lady, and she was delighted. She agreed to actually host the entire service, to be the worship leader, and to take 10 minutes of the sermon time. I went to Kent, and I said, Kent, I want to ask you to do this. And he looked at me very sternly, and he said, now, wait a minute, you said you would never ask me to speak to the congregation. And I said, well, Kent, it's really not me that's asking you to speak to the congregation. It's these two committees. And they think that you have something to say to that particular occasion, and they think that it's going to be very meaningful, and I happen to agree with them. I think they're right. And I even offered to help him write his sermon. Well, he said, I'll think about it. Please don't ever do that to your preacher. I'll think about it. You know? But anyway, that's what he did. A couple of weeks later, I was beginning to get a little nervous about this, and I called him and I said, Kent, what about that Sunday? He said, I'm just not sure I need to do that. I've got some coffee down here at the office. Why don't you come on down and we'll talk about it? So I went down and we got together. We began to talk about it. And after much deliberation, a little bit of an argument, and a modest refusal, he said, it sounds like a good idea to me, Larry, but I just don't believe that God is calling me to speak. And I said, but Kent, I am calling you to speak. And he laughed and he said, but God is not calling me to speak. And I said, but Kent, God has called me to call you to speak. Well, finally he said yes. And he not only did a good job, but he discovered he liked it. He liked it so much he went on and became a certified lay speaker in our annual conference. And so far as I know, he is still going out from that church and speaking in churches all over the annual conference. Now, somebody put a bug in my ear and said, here in this congregation, getting the lay people to stop speaking might actually be more of a problem. When we look at our scripture lesson today, we are introduced to Elisha. Elisha was a great prophet of the Old Testament. And because of that, there are many stories associated with him. One talks about how he makes the axe head float on the surface of the lake. Another story, perhaps the one you're most familiar with, is when Naaman comes to Elisha to be healed of his leprosy. There's another great story about a woman, a widow, who can't pay her bills. Elisha goes to her door and knocks on the door, invites her to gather all the pots and vessels together and to fill them with water. He then says a prayer, and a miracle happens, and all the water is changed to oil, and she's able to sell the oil and therefore pay her bills. My favorite story, though, Elisha, being a holy man like myself, walking along the path one day, minding his own business, praying and talking to God, reading his scripture, and all of a sudden these two little children, probably about your age, came out and they started making fun of his bald head. You know what he did? He prayed a prayer to God, and all of a sudden this great big bear came out of the woods and chased the children away. Now, I think that should serve as a warning to lay people who want to give preachers a hard time about receding hairlines. All of these stories, you understand, are there so that we can become acquainted with the great power and the wisdom and the strength that is given to Elisha as a prophet of God. Elisha was called to be a prophet. The mantle of the prophet Elijah was passed on to Elisha, and Elisha answered the call into the ministry of God. Is there not something intriguing about people who are called into ministry? And whether it's a prophet of old or a person today, we talk about people who enter into ministry, whether they are lay or clergy, as being called. What I want you to understand today is that the call to ministry is not confined to a specific few. I believe that God calls each and every one of us. God calls the doctor, the lawyer, the teacher, the retiree. Now, we got a lot of wonderful young people here this morning, and I want you to listen to this because you're going to be old one day. But I want to talk to the older people right now for just a minute. The retirees, those who are about to retire. I want you to know that the youngest person who's ever gone on one of our teams was a lap baby. I want you to know that the oldest person was over 100. Now, what do? I want to tell you about a lady who was in her 60s. She used to call me, or not used to call me, but she got asked to be on one of her first team. It was a team to Mexico. She started calling my office about 2 months in advance, and she called about twice a week. And she'd call and she'd say, I'm so concerned. I said I was going to go on this mission team, but I don't know what I'm going to do. She said, I'm a housewife. Now, ladies, I'm quoting. She said, I'm a housewife. I don't know what it is I have to offer. And I said, well, let me invite you to pray about it. Let me invite you to stand with your commitment to go on the mission team. And when you get there, you'll find out what it is you're supposed to do. And I told her about playing with the children. I told her about washing hair. I told her about all kinds of stuff that I thought were real easy for a housewife to catch on to. But I also prayed about it. Well, she got there. And thankfully, she couldn't call me, so she was bothering the other volunteers. Many of them were up on the roof, putting a roof on a building. And she kept calling up to them and saying, well, how do you keep the shingles straight? And, are you sure you don't need somebody to hold the ladder? But she was worrying them to death. And finally they said, well, why don't you just get up here on the roof with us and we'll show you what we're doing. They went down, they helped her get up the ladder. They gave her a hammer and some shingle nails and some shingles, and they showed her how they were drawing the chalk line across there, and that's how they kept the shingles straight. She started installing some of the shingles. They got ready to go to lunch a little while later, and they said, come on, we're going to help you down, we're going to lunch. And she said, I'm not really hungry, and I've got these shingles over here, I need to get them on the roof, and I'll just stay up here, and then when I run out of shingles, I'll talk to God. So she installed her shingles. When they came back from lunch, they discovered that she had gone down the ladder. She had gotten a bundle of shingles and put them on her shoulder as she had seen the other volunteers do, and she was still on the roof installing shingles. Now, I'm sure that that experience changed her spiritual life, but I will tell you that the rest of her life, it didn't change it very much. Because the next year, she signed up to go on another mission team, and about 2 months in advance, she started calling me again. But this time, it was, now, I just want to make sure that you understand that I need to be on the construction team because I'm a roofer. She continued to do that well into her 70s. And then we decided we didn't want her on the roof. There's so many stories, and I wish I could share all of them with you, of older people who have found a new life and a new way of witnessing by being on a mission. Milford Teal was in his 80s. He came to me and he said, I really want to go on the mission team to Bolivia. I said, well, Milford, tell me why you want to go. And he said, well, I don't know what it is I'm going to do. I'm 80, but I'd like to help. And he said, but my main reason is because my wife, who also was in her 80s, has signed up to go. She was a retired nurse. And I don't know who's going to cook for me while she's gone. I said, well, Milford, that's a good reason. So we went. And when we got there, we found that Milford could not do very much at all. We were way up in the Andes Mountains. The air is very thin. Milford had some existing conditions that determined to us that he really needed to stay on the ground and do some small things. And we gave him a time to rest each afternoon. On about the third day, we had gotten all of the rafters put up on the building that we were going to be putting a roof on, and we discovered that the roof was a tile roof. I also discovered that no one on the team understood how to put a tile roof on. We had some Bolivian helpers, and they were willing to show us how, but there were also some language barriers, and it was just going to take a long time, and we weren't going to get much work done very fast. But Milford said, Larry, I know how to put on a tile roof. I said, but Milford, you can't get up on the roof. He said, well, what we can do is we can build a model here on the ground. And I can instruct the workers how to put the tile on the roof. And then if you don't mind, I can stand here on this stack of lumber and I can point and direct and show them how to do it. Later in the week, as we were telling our stories of mission, Milford began to weep. I said, Milford, tell me why you're crying. And he said, I realized that this 80-year-old man who had no earthly idea what it was he could do, had not said yes to God, we would not have been able to finish the project that God called us to. Somehow God knew that I had a gift to give to mission. Milford went on many more teams after that until his health did stop his participation. The call to ministry is not confined to a specific few. God calls each and every one of us. God calls the doctor, the lawyer, the teacher, the retiree. I even believe that God calls the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. God calls you and me into ministry. Today, as we talk about the call to ministry, I don't want us to focus on the call to be a preacher, an associate pastor, or an evangelist. I want us to focus on how God calls you and me, to be ministers in our world, to be missionaries around that world. I want you to imagine with me the difference that we could make if every one of us believed that he or she could make a difference. The call to ministry is a call to believe that you can make a Christian difference in the world. If we believe this, I think we could help bring about world peace. I think we could help to eradicate prejudice. We could feed the hungry, the starving. We could make make sure that no person anywhere in the world is homeless. The sad problem is, somehow or another, we think Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, who may have seen Jesus face to face, have got more power than any of us. And what you need to understand, we are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We are the church. We are the disciples of Christ. We are those that God is willing, if we are only willing to take it, God is willing to give us the power to make that kind of difference in the world. And I don't have to convince you the kind of difference those four made, along with many others. I believe that God calls you and me to make a difference with our lives. You may not be called to stand in the pulpit and preach, but you are called to make a difference with what life has brought you, what you already have, what you don't know yet that you already have. Your gifts and graces, your talents and interests, your resources and abilities. You are called to make a difference in ways and opportunities that are available to you. How are you answering that call into mission? Most of you know that wonderful story about the little boy who wakes up early one morning. There's been a big overnight storm at sea, and he goes out on the shore to see what's washed up on the shore. And what he realizes is that a lot of starfish have been washed up on the shore. He knows the starfish are going to die unless they're returned to the ocean water, and he begins to pick them up one by one and throw them back into the ocean. The story goes on that there's a man who's watching this scene from the deck of his beach house, and he comes down after a little while, and with great frustration, he says to the little boy, "I don't know what you think you're doing. You're never going to save them all. You're never going to make a difference." The little boy thinks about the message that the man has brought him for a little bit. Then he gets an idea, and he reaches down, he picks up another starfish, and he hurls it into the ocean. And then he turns to the man and says, "Well, it makes a difference to that one. It makes a difference to that one." I'm certain that you'll agree with me that God calls all of us to the ministry of caring. We are always in situations where we can make a Christian difference in the life of at least one person, and together we can make a Christian difference in the lives of a group of people somewhere in the world. The call to care is not simplistic, but it is simply putting God's love in action. You and I are called to a ministry of caring, and we find ourselves always in a situation where we can do that. What I want you to know and understand this morning is that really is what mission is all about. That's what volunteers in mission is all about. VIM takes the example of that little boy on the shore, and through the organization, the resourcing, and the missional and connectional part of our church, gives individuals and groups of individuals the opportunity to make a Christian difference in corners of the world that are here in our conference in the United States, all over the globe. How many of you ever dreamed that you would have a team in Haiti this Sunday morning? See what God can do if we say yes. Let's be honest. Individually, we're not going to bring about world peace. But we can care about those who are being hurt and who are dying in political conflicts in other parts of the globe. And we can offer them medical help one at a time. Individually, we can't feed all of the hungry people in the world, but one at a time we can feed some of them, and we can offer them new ways of producing their own food. Individually, we cannot provide a home for everybody who's homeless or who lives in less than healthy surroundings, but we can, one family at a time, provide them with a safe and protected place to live. We can't help everybody who needs help, but we can care. And if we're willing to care, if we're willing to say yes, if we're willing to get our own hands dirty, then we can help some of them one at a time. Caring is the ministry that God calls us to in today's world. And to become a volunteer in mission is to decide to care in ways that will make a Christian difference in another person's life. Now, this call to ministry is very personal. Some of you remember the old joke about the man who'd had too much to drink. He found it difficult to find his way home, and when he got home, he couldn't find his keys, and with great embarrassment, he knocked on the door. He woke up his wife, Helen, and said, "I'm so sorry. I know I've hurt you, but would you please help me into bed?" So Helen helped him into bed, and he was so ashamed. And he said, "Helen, I am so sorry. Would you pray for me?" So Helen got down on her knees, and she took her husband's hands in her hands. And she said, "Dear God, I want to pray for my husband who lies here drunk." Now that kind of woke him out of his stupor, and he said, "Now wait a minute, don't tell him I'm drunk, just tell him I'm sick." Sometimes there are things we don't like about ourselves. More often, there are things that we are afraid others might not like about us. We often feel that we're inadequate, that there are others who have much more to offer, who can answer the call better than we. We may not feel that we're able enough or talented enough, or we need to be an expert in some field of service, but God sees that, He knows that, and He calls you anyway. God knows that. We need to realize that those things that hold us up do not hold up God. They're not important to God. He knows. And He calls us anyway. Just as God sent Elijah and Elisha and called them forth to be prophets. Just as Jesus said to those on the seashore, "Come with me, and I will teach you how to fish for people." We need to realize that those things aren't important to God. Now maybe you've always thought, as I did until just a few years ago, that to become a missionary means that you're willing to give up your family and all of your financial resources, your material resources, and move to some deep, dark, far-off place like Africa or the Amazon basin. And missionaries do that, and if you feel called to do that, we'll help you get there. But you don't always have to go forever. You can go for a week. You can go for 2 weeks. You can go to places like Frakes, Kentucky, to Redbird Missionary School. You can go to places like the UMCOR Depot or to Dulac in South Louisiana. How about Mount Sequoia in Arkansas? You want to go a little bit further? There's Alaska. There's the the Native American reservations in Arizona. There are places like Cambodia, India, Africa, Central America, South America, Haiti. The places where our teams are already going. You're invited to go and be a part of that. You're invited to go and build concrete block huts, to teach vacation Bible school, to paint Sunday school rooms, put on roofs, give injections, take temperature, boil in water, sit on stacks of lumber, and give directions to those who are better able to climb on the roof. You may be needed like Ellen was needed. Ellen was a 16-year-old girl who went on one of my teams to the Redbird Missionary Conference. She came to me on about the third day. We were building the back porch on the home of a 90-year-old woman. The porch had fallen in many years ago, and we were repairing it for her so she could get to her washing machine and her bathtub, which was on the back porch. Ellen came to me, and she had Band-Aids on all of her fingers. She had dirt all over her face, and there were big tears that were rolling down through all the dirt. She had a hammer that she was swinging, which she threw at my feet, and I almost took off a couple of toes. And she said, "Larry, I don't know why God would ever call me to be on the mission team. I can't hammer, and I can't saw, and I can't nail. I want to go home." She began to weep even more. About that time, the 90-year-old woman that we were building the back porch on the back of her home came out on the front porch of her home. She had her comb and her brush and her mirror in her hands, and she was maneuvering her rocking chair so she could sit in the sun. She had beautiful long gray hair all the way down to her waist. Remember when our grandmothers had long gray hair? And I turned to Ellen and I said, "Ellen, it's quite true. We've noticed that you can't saw, you can't hammer, and you can't nail. And if you want to go home tomorrow, that's fine. I'll let you go home. But right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to go over and ask that lady if you can help her comb her hair." About an hour later, I couldn't get any work out of anybody on the team because all of us had gathered around this beautiful lady. And we were hearing the stories of her children, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren, her great-great-grandchildren, her great-great get it right, great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. And she kept jumping up and going in and bringing us copies of their report cards and pictures at their second grade class. We learned, sadly, that many of these great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren she had never met in person. Sadly, because of the economic depravity of that part of our country, their parents had moved away many years ago, but had never had the money to come back for their children to meet their grandmother. That night, when we got ready to tell our stories of mission, it was Ellen who was weeping. And I said, "Ellen, tell me why you're crying." And she said, "I realize now why God called me to be on a mission team." You see, Ellen had learned the most important thing you can learn about mission. And that is that every team, including the one that went to Haiti, has a task and they have a purpose. The task is to build a clinic or a church or a house, a fence, to realize a medical clinic or a vacation Bible school. Whatever it is, it's important. We want to get it done. But then the more important thing is the purpose. The purpose is to share the love of Jesus Christ in ways that will make a Christian difference in the lives of those to whom God has placed before us. You are challenged this morning to make a Christian difference in the lives of those washed up on the shores of whatever misfortune the world has handed them. I submit to you that volunteers in mission, any one of our mission teams, and particularly the mission team that's going to Haiti in April out of this congregation, is a way to do that. Now, you may have never thought that one day God might call you to be a missionary. I believe that He has. I know that He does. But if that doesn't work for you, then hear this. God has called me to call you to be a missionary. You've been called. And now the rest of it is up to you. Amen and amen.